What's up everybody and welcome back to the channel. In this video for the First Descendant today, we're doing a gun guide. We haven't done one of these in a super long time, and more specifically, this gun guide is for Kingsguard Lance. Now I'm doing this for two reasons. The first one being that I'm using this weapon a lot more recently, and secondly because oftentimes I get questions from people that don't have access to Malevolent and are looking for a good alternative while they wait for Malevolent to eventually become available at the end of Season 3 or possibly Season 4, due to it being a Season 2 Battle Pass weapon. Now, I think Kingsguard Lance is a fantastic option for you to take in the case of you not having access to Malevolent. Weapons like these, weapons like Malevolent and Kingsguard Lance, are good options for skill-based Descendants who aren't necessarily geared up or good enough to deal with massive amounts of enemies. And so these weapons are fantastic alternatives for you to essentially be able to power level these Descendants just as efficiently as you would if you could actually destroy massive amounts of enemies with your skills. So in the footage in the background, you should see me using it on a couple of different Descendants. The bottom line is the weapon itself is good enough to essentially do 400% infiltrations and Sigma and pretty much all of that. And then when you put it in the hands of a gun-based Descendant that is actually able to juice up the weapon that they have in their hands, like for example Serena, then you're actually able to use this very efficiently in Void Erosion Purge. You can use it in Axion and so on. So this is just a really strong option, and probably one of the weapons I most often suggest to people to develop, especially if they've never tried it out, because it has such a unique playstyle and because it can actually end up being a lot of fun, especially with certain Descendants that, like for example Lepic, that can pull a bunch of enemies towards a certain point, like with a tractor grenade. You can use this to essentially create this loop where you create your turret setting and then you just keep on pulling the enemies into these turrets and blow them away. So super satisfying to play. It's also a fantastic weapon to use if you're in a team with other players, because you're able to disrupt the battlefield so effectively and allow for a lot of the pressure which these enemies usually put on your teammates to be actually not there, but rather be either dealt with the fact that your gun is tearing them apart, or it's locking them down to place due to you using chill mechanics. If this all sounds like a lot of fun, let's go ahead and check out the build. Now, first things first, as always, I think it's a good point for us to just talk about the unique ability. Now, the good news here is it's not super difficult to understand. Basically, the point is Kingsguard Lance is a beam rifle. So if you're just shooting by not aiming down sights, you're just shooting like a normal beam rifle. However, once you aim down sights, you're actually able to put down these Guardian Lances, aka turrets. Now you can have 3 of these active at once, and as soon as you try to place a fourth one, then the first one that you placed will be erased. Also, swapping weapons will of course dismantle all of your turrets, so you have to stay on the Kingsguard Lance the entire time. That means that no, you can't summon 3 lances and then while those lances are blowing shit up, then switch to another fucking gun and shoot the enemies. Unfortunately, that does not work. Now, when you level it up to a 4 out of 4 Kingsguard Lance, you will have the best possible stats here. But the bottom line here being that these turrets essentially become little beam rifles themselves, and they shoot lasers out. And these lasers are actually also elemental driven, so they can introduce elemental damage and that sort of thing. And that's, for example, the reason why we put chill on here, because it means that the lances themselves can actually chill and slow down and eventually freeze enemies as well. So even tougher enemies that are not necessarily immediately dying to the damage that you're dealing to them, you will lock them down and kind of like keep them in place, which again feeds back to my earlier point about this also being a very group friendly weapon, because it means that your allies will have a super easy time targeting those enemies and disposing of them. Now, the stats here, basically, pretty much the weapon is driven from a firearm damage perspective. So of course your lances are going to deal more damage if you push your firearm damage up. And then of course things like radius and stuff like that can also help, because it makes the rings bigger that you can essentially expand it to. Because what you can also do is you can increase the duration that a lance stays on the battlefield effectively forever, as long as you keep juicing it up. And you can also increase the size that the lance can cover by shooting it with the beam rifle. Of course, you have to do this without aiming down sights, because when you aim down sights, you place turrets. But when you just shoot off the hip, you will be able to juice up your Guardian Lances and give them more duration, as well as increase the size that they can shoot, pretty much up to like 3 stages. That's pretty much it. So when it comes to the weapon itself, and as I said again, the idea here for me is I want to build this Kingsguard Lance with two important things in mind. First of all, I want it to be a weapon that is good in anybody's hands. All right. And then secondly, I also want to future-proof it in such a way, meaning that if you do decide to use this on a gun-based Descendant and you want to take it into some of the more heavier, difficult content in the game, like Void Erosion Purge, that I want this Kingsguard Lance to also be usable in that instance. So what we're going to do here is we're going to I'm going to show you two different versions. The only difference being that one is a little bit more flavored towards crit, where if you have a Descendant that juices up crit, that can be something that you could potentially use. And because I always get this question, hey dude, why don't you build it for crit or something like that? So I'll show you the crit version of it as well. But the version that's on the screen right now is the version that I mostly use, which is not crit focused at all, but rather focused on firearm attack and elemental damage, and essentially ramping up the firearm attack as much as possible. So with that in mind, what you want to do is your first three modules are your three modules that are going to focus on increasing your firearm attack. That's going to be action and reaction, rifling reinforcement, and charge amplification. All three of these increase your firearm attack in different amounts. What charge amplification does is it also does decrease your firearm critical hit damage and basically bottoms it out. So this is why this is a non-crit version of the build. The next thing is Sweeping Squad, which is a really good ultimate mod for us, which says that when you defeat an enemy, your firearm attack also stacks up. So this is a fourth source of firearm attack for us. All right. Then fire rate up is good for us here because the turrets themselves, their damage ticks like a laser, and fire rate will actually increase the tick rate of that. So the damage overall will be more with a faster fire rate. This will mean more later on when we look at weapon cores and stuff like that as well, but absolutely fire rate is a good thing for us to pick up. And then expand weapon charge here gives us more rounds per magazine. Once again, there's a certain cost to placing a turret, but then there's also a cost to actually firing the weapon and juicing up your turrets. Increasing the weapon charge, meaning the amount of rounds per magazine, means that with one magazine, you're able to juice up all three turrets with relative ease while not running out of, rounds in your magazine. So pretty good like that. Next up, this is a personal choice for me, Recycling Genius. I really like the fact that I want this weapon to reload fast and snappy. So the extra 30% faster reload time here is, I think, invaluable in a way for me. Yes, of course, this is like I said, a flex choice. This is something that I personally choose. You could take this off and you can roll, cancel, reload, anything like that. It's entirely up to you. The other one that I also have on here that's also a personal choice is Brisk Walk. This says that on hit, movement speed is plus 24% for 10 seconds with a cooldown of 15 seconds. This is more like just a value add kind of sort of thing. And once again, also another flex slot. I like the fact that this essentially lets me just move around a little bit faster. And then last but not least is your element. Now, we are focusing into chill, and that's also a good thing because Kingsguard Lance's intrinsic element is also chill. So we are just sort of like boosting that up a lot. So we're putting chill enhancement on here, which gives us another 30% of firearm attack as chill attack. And then we are getting chill priority on here, which gives us chill attack plus 50% and then introduces this reload time modifier, which is the other reason why I do this. If I don't put in Recycling Genius, then you're suffering this 30% reload time modifier. Whereas with Recycling Genius in there, then it essentially nullifies it and brings it back to 0, which feels a little bit more comfortable for me to use. If you decide to use a flex slot here, then I would definitely consider learning things like roll canceling and stuff like that for your reloads, just to make the reloads a little bit snappier because it tends to be a little bit long with this particular beam rifle. So this is the entire setup here in its entirety. Now, I will just quickly show you the crit variant because the crit variant only has 3 modules swapped out, okay? So in the brute power, the brute force, the firearm version of the weapon, we have this here. And with the crit lance, you'll see that essentially I introduce better insight and better concentration in, all right? Which gives us critical hit rate as well as critical hit damage. And I swap out over here, I swap out charge amplification, which as you recall, tanks our critical hit damage, which we don't want it to do now. I swap that out for bullet integration, which in this case gives us firearm attack, a much lesser value though, but also gives us firearm critical hit damage of 10%. So those 3 mods swapped out is a more crit-centric version of Kingsguard Lance, and this can be for situations where you are playing a gun-based Descendant that has a way of essentially capitalizing that, and so this is a better version of a crit type weapon for you. That being said, 99% of the time, this is the version of the weapon that I run. Now, quickly just talking about substats and weapon cores. If we look at the weapon cores, you'll see that you have 2 free cores, then you have a firearm or colossus damage core, then you have an elemental core, and then you have a faction core. Those are your 5 cores that are available to you. So you can see that I don't have perfectly rolled versions of this here. You can, of course, make the weapon even better than the one that I have right in front of you right now. But you want 2 fire cores on your free cores. You want, of course, a firearm attack on your firearm core. You want chill as your elemental core. And then this is the part where you start making the weapon good for going into Void Erosion Purge 10. All right. So you want to put on bonus firearm attack versus Legion of Darkness. The reason why we do that is if we go here and we look at Void Erosion Purge, you can see that 10 of VEP is Legion of Darkness. That is the enemies that you fight there. So this is a way for you to essentially make your damage better for this particular encounter. So anywhere where you fight Legion of Darkness, you're going to be dealing more damage against them, but more specifically in this case here, this is going to help you do Void Erosion Purge with relative ease if you're using a gun-based Descendant like Serena and you're using Kingsguard Lance. Because not only are you going to capitalize from the Legion of Darkness, but you're also going to capitalize on the very weak to chill or very weak to ice or whatever you want to call it. So then just taking us back here in our substats here, firearm critical hit damage is obviously like just there for the crit version of the weapon. If you're building the brute force version of the weapon, you might consider putting on like trigger rate for your element, which would mean that chill will trigger more often. That could be something that you could consider, or you could just leave critical hit damage on there because, you know, if you do eventually end up switching to the crit version of the weapon and you're not running 2 different Kingsguard Lances, then you can still capitalize on that. Firearm attack is good here. Chill attack, obviously, once again, feeding into our element. And then we are putting in bonus firearm attack versus Legion of Darkness here. And that's pretty much it. That is the weapon in all its entirety. I pretty much suggest Kingsguard Lance to people that don't have Malevolent as a fantastic weapon to allow you to level Descendants with. But these days, I kind of just like using it a lot because it is a fantastic way to area deny certain places of the map. And essentially because I would say 99% of the enemies in the game fucking run directly at you to deal you damage. This is a fantastic way to put some damage in between you and those enemies and absolutely rip them apart. Let me know if you enjoy the Kingsguard Lance. What is your favorite weapon to use when you are just trying to fast level your Descendants as fast as possible? Of course, Malevolent is a very strong choice there as well. And that's going to be it. Thank you very much for the support. It's been fantastic on the videos. Keep watching. Tons more videos coming. And as always, fucking cheers.